Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session titled Research Impact for the Benefit of Communities, Enhancing University of British Columbia's Knowledge Exchange Capacity. This is hosted by Community-Based Research Canada. My name is Julia Coburn, and I'm the CBRC Program Coordinator. I will be the moderator for today's session. So Community-Based Research Canada's mission is to address real societal problems through research as a national champion and facilitator for community-based research and campus community engagement in Canada. For 10 years, CBRC has brought together key players of community campus partnerships. Some CBRC founding members continue to be on the CBRC board today. Our network builds capacity for academia and broader communities to collaborate and use research as a tool to mobilize community participation in action. We'd love to hear from you, so please share your comments and questions in the chat box during or after the presentation. You can see it on the right-hand side. I will share your questions with the presenter during the Q&A period, which will take place within the last 15 minutes of the presentation. I'm pleased to introduce our presenter for today, Karine Soufez. Karine Soufez has 15 years of experience in knowledge translation and exchange in support of practice and policy. She's passionate about KT, and she moved to BC in 2018 to join UBC's VPRI office with a mandate to develop and implement a knowledge exchange unit. From 2005 to 2018, she worked at the Quebec Public Health Institute, a center of reference and expertise in public health, where she was responsible for developing the KT sector. She assembled a team of KT counselors and spearheaded more than 100 KT projects, emphasizing the importance of early and ongoing interactions with non-academic partners and the development of products that meet users' needs. She's published and presented widely on KT, collaborating with KT research teams and experts across Canada. So we're pleased to have Karine present this webinar for today, and I'm going to take it away, Karine.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me well? Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you for attending. And hi, David. Everyone knows David Phipps. He's the lead of Research Impact Canada, and we're part of this fantastic network. So hi, David, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm delighted to be here and introduce UBC's early initiatives to develop a knowledge exchange capacity. And while I have to say that we're at the very beginning of our journey, I find it useful and important to open up about our plan so I can get some feedback and questions from people. It's always helpful to think about different ways of seeing. And so I hope this webinar will be as useful to you that it will be as useful to me. So just to give you a little bit of context, the Knowledge Exchange Unit was created almost a year ago, well, a little bit more than a year ago in November 2018 by the Office of the Vice President Research and Innovation, which is a central office at the university providing support to researchers across disciplines. And within our portfolio, we also have a new initiative called Innovation UBC that comprises 4 units and 4 pathways: commercialization, entrepreneurship, innovation partnerships, and of course, knowledge exchange. And we work together to provide support to researchers to engage in the most effective pathways to impacts. And because we know there is not one single pathway, and sometimes there are intertwined, we work closely with one another. So that was for the context piece of my presentation. Now, I've organized my presentation around 3 simple questions. Why a new knowledge exchange unit? Why did we need that to enhance our capacity? What is knowledge exchange and what do we mean by that? And what are our plans to achieve our goals? So why a new unit? I would say that the need for support on knowledge exchange is driven by new imperatives. The first one being public expectations on return on investment on research. So taxpayers want to know what they're paying for, basically. And echoing that, funding agencies now require, for the most part, that researchers include knowledge exchange plans as part of their grant proposals. So that's another huge driver to generate needs, or that generates some requests for support from researchers. Our UBC strategic plan also has a clear commitment to foster connections beyond academia with communities and make our research accessible and actionable as well. And another driver that I want to emphasize is also the benefits to researchers, because many researchers feel a strong responsibility to give back to society and see this as a tremendous opportunity to connect with communities, with external stakeholders, and engage in conversations and exchanges that enrich their research. So all this basically comes down to one main motivation, which is to increase the positive impacts of research for the benefit of communities. That's the ultimate goal that drives the movement of knowledge exchange. And a benefit to communities can take different forms. Um, One of them is policy change. And we have many researchers at UBC who are well known for having um, impacted the policy process. And one of them is Dr. Paul Kershaw, who you can see at the right of this picture, and who works at the UBC School of Population and Public Health. And Dr. Paul Kirsch's work is well known because of his Generation Squeeze project that revealed the growing gap between home prices and the young people's earnings, and the impact that that has on standard of living. And so he directly contributed with his work um, to the first tax on empty homes in North America, which is a huge contribution. But has but how but as he says it, sorry, he emphasized that he could not have done that without mobilizing the people who are impacted by these measures, being families, being young people, and he worked notably using social media to be able to mobilize all these people, but also connecting directly with them, almost campaigning and traveling around BC and around the country to meet with people and capture their stories, so that it was also able to relate and refer to lived experience to combine that with his evidence so that it could speak to decision makers and the general public. So that's one example of benefit to communities that can come out of research. Now, another one is this evidence informed project called, let me grab my notes so that I can say it properly. It's called Active Aging BC, Active Aging BC, that aim to enhance the health, mobility, and social connectedness of older adults in BC. And this team is hosted at the Center for Hip and Health and Mobility at UBC. And they are really doing fantastic work connecting with community partners, government stakeholders, and also older adults themselves as authentic research partners. And together they evaluate the impacts and the implementation of interventions that are novel prevention strategies to enhance the health of older people. So that's another example of benefits to communities impacting programs and social interventions. The other project I wanted to highlight this morning, well, for you almost afternoon, is this project led by a student to say that even research led by students can make a huge difference. And in this example, Aiden Pine collaborated with Indigenous people to in his project to revitalize Jitsan language. And so he first started by developing an open access technology that would eventually support a dictionary app. And so that would be free of use for the communities with whom he was working. And from there, he went on to partner with Jitsan speakers to populate his dictionary and to research and document their language in writing. And so that huge undertaking that can take many years ended up creating a new tool that he was able to make available to these communities he was working with, and to make it available to new generations of speakers. So these are three illustrations, but we have many more stories of impacts and benefits to communities on our website. And I would encourage you to go and have a look at them because they're beautiful stories of connection and exchange and partnerships. And although I have to say that because the knowledge exchange unit is so new, we can't take credit for any of these stories. We do know that by talking with these researchers that this kind of work takes time, takes resources, and also takes a certain role shift for some researchers who need to develop a new skill set to be able to do that kind of work. So there is a need for support, and that's why the Knowledge Exchange Unit was created at UBC. But before I go into detail about our plans with this new unit, I just want to make a pause and explain what we mean by knowledge exchange, because some people use the terms knowledge translation, other people call it research impact, some people call it knowledge mobilization. We have decided to use the term knowledge exchange um, just to just because these terms can reflect the two-way learning process, or the two-way learning process, the interactive process behind knowledge exchange. And I like to use this image um, to define what knowledge exchange is. So it's the process by which we help connect the dots between what we know and what we do about it. And that requires lots of interactions and connections between researchers and non-academic partners to co-create evidence, but also to make meaning of evidence in light of people's knowledge, experience, and local context. And that in turn impacts the research process itself. Now, I've borrowed this slide from the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research because I think it shows the fact that knowledge exchange can spread out through a wide spectrum of engagement, starting from informing people about research and going all the way to collaboration and shared leadership in strong research partnerships. Now, not everyone, because of their research context, are able to reach the highest level of engagement in all circumstances, but we try to encourage researchers to engage early on with end users and knowledge users and external partners early on in their projects, because we know that it's through interactions that we get to better align the research with community needs and priorities. And from there, that the likelihood that research will get used and will generate impacts will be higher. Sorry, I have trouble with the slides. getting there. Right. Um, Okay, so the Knowledge Exchange Unit aims to support researchers wherever they are in their knowledge exchange journey, and build capacity to help people establish meaningful relationships and meaningful research collaborations, and also effective communication, whether that be with their research partners or with broader audiences that they're trying to reach. And all this with the ultimate goal of generating positive research impact. I'm sorry for the delay. It's not because of time difference. Just it takes a little while before my slides show up. Okay, so we're trying to provide some support along these knowledge exchange principles. And for those of you who work in the community engagement space, these will sound very familiar. So we want to promote public good. Of course, we want to encourage positive research impacts, but that also means being aware that we can generate some negative impacts. And for that, we need to be cognizant all the way, like from the outset of the research project, but also throughout the research project of potential negative impacts that we can cause. And that starts with ethical considerations and ethical questions. Collaboration. We want to ensure that research partners have a say in the research project and are able to shape it and influence the way the research is conducted, so that the process is reciprocal and that there are mutual benefits for all the parties involved. Also, we want to promote diversity and inclusion. In very broad terms, I would say, acknowledging that there are different ways of knowing and that there are different types of knowledge, and that all can contribute to the research process and enrich it. But also diversity and inclusion in seeking advice and listening to the voices of those who have been traditionally marginalized. Finally, the last principle is to adopt context-specific approaches, because there is no single strategy that is effective in all contexts. And so, therefore, we need to be aware and cognizant of the different environments in which we're trying to practice knowledge exchange. And so, based on all these principles, we also reinforce the message that knowledge exchange is more than dissemination. It's all about human connections. It's about building relationships. It's about forming research partnerships when it's possible. Now, how are we going to encourage that in our organization? So, as I was mentioning, we're at the very beginning of our journey. So, as of yet, what I will be presenting are our plans for the coming years. So, it's our knowledge exchange strategy that takes roots in our UBC strategic plan. So we do have a strategy called knowledge exchange that invites us to improve the ecosystem that supports the translation of research into action. And by that, we acknowledge that there are many groups, there are many units at UBC already contributing to the knowledge exchange cycle, and that we want to adopt a collaborative approach and leverage collective expertise to be able to not only build capacity, but provide the right conditions for people to practice knowledge exchange. And so to be able to do that, we started by understanding the context, opportunities, and barriers within our institution. And we were fortunate enough to have knowledge exchange scholars working on this question. So Laura Quill, Marcelo Bravo, and Matthew McLennan published two reports in 2017-2018 highlighting the need for knowledge exchange, basically around resources and tools, incentives and recognition of one's one-stop shop of services, making it easy for researchers to access resources available. A convening place where researchers and external partners could meet and establish relationships and maintain these relationships. Knowledge brokers who can facilitate the link between researchers and non-academic partners. Liaison with other UBC units, doing research or scholarship on the topic of knowledge exchange as a field in itself. Also developing or adopting innovative ways of socializing the importance of knowledge exchange. And finally, developing some metric frameworks for research impact. So as you can see, the list is fairly long. So we needed to establish some priorities for the first years of the knowledge exchange unit, also taking into consideration the following barriers that were identified by this team. So there is a lack of incentives and recognition within our institution, but also across institutions, I would say, that result in the perception that knowledge exchange is not necessarily a priority. So we need to work on that. We also need to work on providing resources because there are some barriers around capability, and by that I mean around knowledge and skills. There is still a limited understanding of what knowledge exchange means beyond dissemination, and researchers want to know or learn more about the range of possibilities and strategies that are available to them. And finally, there are also some methodological challenges associated with the practice of knowledge exchange because it's so context dependent that every time we need to kind of initiate a new process in itself. So there's no one recipe applicable to all situations. And there are also some methodological challenges associated with evaluating and measuring the impact of a knowledge exchange and demonstrating the added value of incorporating that in our projects. So we organized our knowledge exchange strategy around 4 objectives that each aim to tackle knowledge exchange barriers. And I will go through each of these objectives in my next slides. I'm sorry, everything is in red. At first it was in blue, so it probably changed in the uploading of the document in the system. So it's pretty intense, but it was intended to be in blue. So the first objective is to increase awareness and competency in knowledge exchange principles and practices. And that objective aims to tackle barriers around capability, or what I just explained or just defined as being around knowledge and skills. And so helping people to understand what knowledge exchange means, because it's still a new word for many people. And many people are already practicing knowledge exchange, but just don't label it as such. And so it's also a matter of explaining and showing that there is already excellent work being done at UBC. Therefore, we need resources to help people better understand what knowledge exchange entails. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are already excellent resources existing out there, notably through Research Impact Canada that is producing many excellent tools. So sometimes it's just a matter of promoting these tools, making them accessible, and adapting them. We also want to organize some events and knowledge exchange showcase sessions where we will exemplify the range of possibilities in knowledge exchange and also show what it can look like depending on disciplines. We're also in the process of developing a training program that will allow participants to develop their own learning package and tap into a menu of resources. And we want to complement that with a mentorship program where we will tap into the knowledge and experience of knowledge exchange scholars at UBC who can help out develop and co-develop some capacity building activities and also provide some aftercare service to training participants so that we can ensure sustainable practices over time. And we plan to put together a community of practice within our institution so that people who want to share best practices, but also what worked, what didn't in their context, and continue to develop their skills and knowledge exchange, have the space to do so. Our second objective is to expand the scope of support through the coordination of knowledge exchange related services. So I will come back to this slide in a second, but I just want to show you what I call my bubble diagram. Because when I arrived at UBC a year ago or so, I was astonished by the number of groups and resources who were already contributing in a way to the knowledge exchange cycle. So I decided to map these resources, and I won't go through all these groups in detail. You have the list of acronyms at the end of my presentation. But I just want to highlight that community engagement, government relations, research support staff, student groups such as Public Scholars Initiative and MyTax, people in the competency development realm, communications, commercialization, and also groups within faculties, all kind of hold a piece of the knowledge exchange puzzle. And so we want to adopt a collaborative approach so that we can connect with one another at the right time and therefore offer a suite of services that covers the wide spectrum of knowledge exchange. So to be able to do that, we started by putting together a knowledge exchange advisory committee that comprises representatives from different disciplines within our institution. So the Faculty of Medicine, Education, Arts, Science, and Applied Science are represented. We have researchers, professors involved. We have staff and also students represented around the table. And this group helps to identify guidance and orientations for this current strategic plan. We also are conducting an environmental scan right now to identify the different supporting units at UBC that contribute to knowledge exchange so that we're able to make it more visible to researchers and hopefully also foster more linkages among units. And from there, we want to establish some mechanisms of collaboration with these units so that we're able to reach out to the right people at the right time and offer seamless services to researchers. And finally, we engage in external networks so that we're able to identify and share opportunities with the UBC academic community. Our third objective is to strengthen engagement between academic and non-academic partners. And that objective tackles barriers related to support and opportunities because engagement does require time, efforts, and as I mentioned earlier, a role shift for researchers. And although we don't have the capacity yet to offer a knowledge brokering service university-wide, we will offer some assistance and guidance to help researchers think about these considerations early on in their research projects, so providing assistance for knowledge exchange plans. But we also plan to pilot support for research partnerships for a few projects. So potentially doing or offering knowledge brokering for these early projects. And our last objective, but not least, is to increase public awareness of the societal impact of UBC research. And that objective relates to barriers associated with methodological challenges, because what we're aiming to do here is to capture the non-academic impacts of research. And by that, I mean the impacts on public policy, on programs and services, on public dialogue, on culture as well. So that is a wide undertaking, especially because it's not necessarily easy to attribute the impacts to a specific research project, and especially because these impacts can take a while before appearing. Therefore, we will work with a working group to develop and identify metrics that can help us assess and capture these non-academic impacts. And because we know that numbers are not everything, we also want to develop some impact narratives that will complement the statistics or the numbers that we have, and that will also speak to the stories of researchers, but not only researchers, also the people who have participated in these research projects and who can speak to the impacts um, that the research had on their daily lives or on their work, and also tell the stories from their perspectives. Um, so that is our fourth objective, and that completes the activities we're foreseeing for this for the first 3 years of the life of the Knowledge Exchange Unit. And so it's a fairly ambitious plan, as you can see, but we wanted to have a comprehensive approach that reinforces the 5 dimensions that David Phipps and Julie Bailey have identified in what they call the Institutional Health Check Workbook. So a plug for David Phipps. I hope, David, you'll be happy. Um, but I'm also highlighting that work because it was really helpful in our reflection to make sure that we reinforce the 5 C's in our strategies. So a clear commitment from the institution to do knowledge exchange and to support knowledge exchange and to make it a priority. Connectivity, that refers to the extent to which supporting units work together within the institution, but not only work together, but relate to an overall strategy and see where they fit within the big picture. Clarity, which is the extent to which people within the institution understand what it means to do knowledge exchange and what it means to what knowledge exchange means in itself. Competencies, so ensuring that we provide the right services and support skills development. And finally, co-production. So providing the space, providing the conditions, again, supporting skills development to make sure that researchers engage early on when possible with the potential end users of their work and engaging in meaningful relationships. So I will end my presentation with this last slide. Um, just to say that I know that unpacking a strategy like that may not seem directly related to providing benefits to communities, especially because we're not providing services directly to external stakeholders to the institution. But I want to emphasize the fact that we do believe that by providing support to researchers, we also help create new opportunities to engage with external stakeholders, with communities, and provide the right space to engage in these meaningful collaborations and relationships. So I will leave it to that for now and go over to the questions and leave it to Julia to perhaps identify a few questions that are in the chat box. But I also want to say that I left my contact information in my presentation, so you can reach out afterwards if you have more questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Corinne. This was an extremely insightful webinar that you shared. So many practical tips that I think people can really benefit from. And I think it was just wonderful to have you walk through these steps and your strategy. And it was just a wonderful overview. And we just want to thank you so much on behalf of Community-Based Research Canada for taking the time to share this insight from Knowledge Exchange. So thank you so much. I wanted to mention to everybody that we will be recording this webinar, and we have been recording this webinar. You can find the recorded webinar by early next week on communityresearchcanada.ca/webinars. You can see the URL at the bottom of the screen here, and it's under our resource section. So there's been a few really interesting questions that have come up, so I'm going to bring up some things that have come up here. David has been asking, how does knowledge exchange connect to Indigenous communities, and how is traditional knowledge involved in these approaches?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. As I said, we're just starting, so I don't have a specific example to relate on how we connect with Indigenous communities. I would say that we're very fortunate at UBC to have an Indigenous research support initiative that is already in contact with many Indigenous communities, and we will work with this initiative to best support researchers. But basically, what they do is to help establish collaborations that work along the principles that I've mentioned, ensuring that there are meaningful collaborations between researchers and Indigenous communities participating in the research projects, and also that we meet the needs, but also develop projects that originate from questions that Indigenous communities have, and also working and empowering them to do their own research. So that's part of the Indigenous Research Support Initiative, and I invite you, if you have any questions, to connect with them because they're doing fantastic work. But as for the knowledge exchange unit, what I would say is that while providing support to researchers in their knowledge exchange plans, for instance, if they want to connect with Indigenous communities, we will necessarily work with other groups at UBC who are already engaged with these groups so that we can have their insights from the very beginning. So that's what I would answer at this stage.
Yeah, that's really good insight to share just how the process that you would go about with that, and it would be very interesting to just stay tuned. So with this group, and I imagine as those projects come up, you'll start posting them on your website as well as case studies. So that'd be really fascinating just to keep on top of that. And please share those examples with us as well, because we would love to share examples like that with our community. Another question from CA Klassen was, how did you go about collecting the research impact stories on your website? So it's actually very relevant kind of question.
Yes, definitely. That's a really good question as well. So as of yet, it's mainly through the different faculties that we heard about different projects that we were able to surface and feature these stories. So we haven't yet defined systematic approach to be able to identify all these stories. There are so many, but that is part of our plans for the coming years, to be able to collect all these different stories, and also identify the ones that involve research partnerships and research collaborations, because that speaks to the impacts that we have in our communities.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing what you've been able to do in just 1 year. And also just thinking about the potential of where this is going to go is really exciting. There's quite a few more questions. So thank you so much to everybody that's asking, and please continue to ask more questions. I have another one from Jennifer, who's saying that we're interested in hearing about how students may be involved in these knowledge exchange initiatives. How does your office, and also how does your office work with UBC's Center for Community Engaged Learning?
Yes, that's also a great question. So we're working closely with the Center of Community Engaged Learning. Their director is involved in our advisory committee, and so we don't have specific collaborative project at this time, but we're in close communication. And so the Center of Community Engaged Learning, well, I'm guessing that Jennifer probably can speak more to their mission, but I would say that they are working with professors and researchers to embed community engagement considerations in the classroom and in the teaching programs. And so there's a close connection there, and we intend to work closely with CSAL to be able to reach out to these different community groups that they're working with. So that's one part. And how we involve students. Well, we also see an opportunity to include students in our training program and providing some capacity building activities for them as well. Just yesterday, we held a workshop for Public Scholars Initiative, PhD, and postdoc students. So that was quite interesting to engage and also offer these activities to students, because we do believe that these are key competencies to develop within the academic training, but also in preparation for the workplace. So students are definitely
Absolutely.
part of this strategy.
That's really fascinating, and also just to think about, like, as you were speaking, the life cycle of knowledge exchange, and really that's an aspect of it as an academic institution, is developing the capacity at the student level, and then seeing that this kind of research really being more of a prominent form of research at institutions. So that's very exciting. Another person asked, David was asking, what is the difference between knowledge exchange and knowledge mobilization?
Yes, that's another great question. Um, Actually, my take on it is that it's the same thing. It's just different terms to describe the same process. Not everyone agrees with that, of course, but that's my perspective. Um, the additional reason why we decided to use knowledge exchange at UBC is because it has I would say, a neutral component to it, to the terms. Because some people associate knowledge mobilization with social science and humanities, because SSHRC, the funding agency, uses these terms and this expression. Whereas CIHR, so Canadian Institutes for Health Research, use knowledge translation or integrated knowledge translation to talk about that process. So we decided to use knowledge exchange because it's kind of in the middle and it can be inclusive of all disciplines. But basically, it's really the same process, same way of defining it.
Yeah, so really three different terms for a similar thing, and then even with ourselves, with community-based research, and certainly lots of overlap in that area as well. Tanya was asking a question about, she was just speaking to how it was an excellent presentation, which certainly I think all of us could echo that. My question relates to the types of support that researchers typically need, and can you provide any examples?
Yes. So I would say that one need, or perhaps one question that comes very often, is, can I just make a cold call to a community partner to engage? And that may seem like very basic, but it's something that people are wondering about. Is this a practice that they can engage with? Also, some people will ask that similar question, but for policymakers or decision makers. How can I engage with decision makers? Can I just reach out to them, or will that be seen as being uh, lobbying for my university, whereas it's completely different than engaging with decision makers for the purpose of ensuring that research is being used. It's not like representing a case, or it's not like advocating for some resources for the university. It's kind of world. So that's one question. Another question that comes very often is, um, how can I make sure that my research is or my project is mutually beneficial to others? And that basically comes down to opening the conversation and communicating with the partners that may be involved in the process or the research, um, to see where the research project may align or may not align with their objectives. And in our workshop yesterday, I found that the partners who were participating in the panel were really insightful about that, providing some very practical tips, just saying, if you can in advance, do a little bit of homework, go through our strategic plans, go through documents about our organization on our website, and identify points of connection that will help to engage early on and try to find some mutually beneficial mutual benefits in the project.
Thanks so much, Karine. And please, I have some questions for Karine, and if you have questions, feel free to continue to type them. We have a couple more minutes for questions before we start wrapping up. I'm really curious how, so far, I know it's still fairly new, the knowledge exchange unit has really started to have an impact on the culture of research at UBC, and any evidence of that you've seen so far.
Wow, that's a big question. I would say that at this point, I wouldn't talk about necessarily impacts, but I would say that there is a general enthusiasm for knowledge exchange. There's a curiosity to understand what it is, and how we can best support that in research projects. So I would say that it's not impacts, but I can definitely see some great interest from the academic community, and people are really receptive and saying that they would have needed that support way before now. So that's also a very good feedback. The other element I would like to emphasize is the collaborations that we have with all the different groups that you've seen on my bubble diagram. And again, that's maybe not speaking to the impacts of the unit, but it certainly demonstrates that. Oh, thank you. It certainly demonstrates that there is a potential for coordinating efforts and collaborating together to broaden the scope of support that we can provide.
Yeah, I love this diagram. It's really great to see it, kind of everything lined up that way in those relationships. I see a question coming in, but I do have another one. You were talking about mechanisms of collaboration. I thought that was a really interesting term. I wonder if you can speak to some examples of what that might look like.
Yeah, well, for instance, I'm thinking about the UBC library and how and when to involve them in the assistance we're providing to researchers, for instance. So if we can, let's say, define that they can have an input at the very beginning when researchers are thinking about open access, for instance, and what are the considerations? Well, that for me is a mechanism of collaboration, identifying key points of contact contact and when to engage with different groups, because we can't all be there at the same time, but it's trying to reach out at the right moment so that it's seamless for researchers, and making sure that we avoid um, making them knock on multiple doors, because that's where we can definitely lose people. So trying to make it easy to navigate the landscape of resources available.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's so interesting. Yeah, so many different components. I'm going to just take this one last question from Kelly. Is there any explicit attention to recognizing negative impacts on communities that may have occurred in the past or may occur in the future that would affect the present collaboration?
Yes. So that's a very good question, and I'm still trying to figure out how we will best be able to do that. But I think it's super important to do that while we are trying to celebrate the successes that we have and the impacts that we have, the positive ones. I think we also have to document the negative impacts that happened previously, so that we are also mindful of how that can alterate the positive impacts we can have in other projects. Because the past also determines the present and the future, and the past negative experience that happened may prevent us from establishing meaningful collaborations right now. So we have to acknowledge that um, in documenting it, I think, and being transparent and upfront about it.
Yeah, I think obviously the ideal is to avoid it, but as we're going into it's a messy environment, and I think it's a good approach to be as transparent as possible, and then continue to learn from one another.
Yes, if I can add to that, I would say that the fourth objective is to capture the non-academic impacts of research, and sometimes that can be seen as a kind of a promotional exercise of telling how we were able to make a difference. But I really see an opportunity there to not only talk about the university side, but also the external stakeholders and the partners who are basically the ones making the difference out of the research we produce, right? So having them involved in speaking to their stories and also sharing their perspective is part of that project as well.
I do have another question from Isabel. So again, thank you for your presentation. She was asking if you could elaborate on how community partners are involved in your project and how they contribute to defined knowledge exchange strategies.
Yes, that's a very good question. We've reflected on that a lot, especially in relation with our advisory committee, because for now it's mainly internal. And I don't think that this will remain the case, but we started to work with internal representatives only at this stage, just because we had lots of in-house discussions to have, and we wanted to be mindful of people's time and engaging them at the right time so that they can have an input in the process. So we were really mindful of that, discussing that with community engagement folks and making sure that we're thoughtful and mindful in the way we involve external people in the process. So that was the decision made at this stage, but we intend to open up our processes. So that's for, I would say, the governance structure around the knowledge exchange unit. But within our research projects, that's where we also want to engage with community partners early on. And so many researchers are already doing that. There are many stakeholders involved in different advisory committees at UBC. So many great examples of that. So that would be my answer. I also want to say that I see a great potential of opening up and collaborating with community partners in our project of capturing non-academic impacts of research and connecting with them to see what speaks to them, what's useful to know in terms of impact, and how can that be useful to them as well. Perhaps it's for their reporting within their organization. Yeah, making it really useful. So I think there's also some space to engage with community partners in our working group on defining metrics for capturing non-academic impacts of research.
So yeah, thank you so much, Corinne. And lots of really great resources being shared, including the research manifesto document that was wonderful. And David was sharing a research impact report on negative impacts. And there were some other great resources if you scroll through the chat box. And we thank you so much for sharing that as well.
Oh, yes, and David is reminding me because David was quite involved also before I arrived in UBC's processes, but he's also mentioning that there was community consultation and the research that informed UBC knowledge exchange before I arrived. So the documents that I referred to in the work of Maura Quill, Marcelo Bravo, and Matthew McLennan led to consultations with external stakeholders, and their input was captured in these documents that also inform our knowledge exchange strategy.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to wrap up this Q&A portion. Corinne, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, Susan Patterson is mentioning the Downtown East Side Research Access Portal, and I'm also involved in that project and learning a lot from their process and the way they engage and all the considerations that they have in mind while conducting this project. So I totally agree with you that it's a great example and that we want to emulate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, Corinne has very thoughtfully shared her contact information. If you have further questions that you'd like to reach out to Corinne, her email and phone number is available here. And as Corinne was mentioning earlier, she's listed some acronyms that were in her presentation. Also, this slides as well as the webinar recording, we'll have them both up on our CBRC Canada website, so you'll be able to refer to it at a later time. So we want to thank you again so much, Corinne, for this wonderful presentation. It was truly informative, and for everybody for their participation and sharing resources, your questions. We so appreciate this engagement. There are lots of other ways to get involved with CBRC. You can become a member as an institution, organization, individual, or faculty or student. You can continue to join these wonderful webinars such as this. Another one is coming up on March 12th with Community Engaged Scholarship Institute, so we're excited about that as well. We also have regular e-news and our social media accounts on Twitter and LinkedIn, so you can stay tuned with community-based research events and information that come up across Canada. Please share also what you're working on, because we love to share these wonderful examples, including any more from Corinne and your team. You can also sign up to our mailing list again to receive that information. And lastly, we have our CTU Expo 2020 coming up this May in Sault Ste. Marie. And so early bird registration is still live. And so that's going to be a wonderful congregation of practitioners, researchers, community members coming together to discuss some really important topics around community-based research. We really encourage you to please take a couple minutes to share your feedback about this webinar. After you log out of this webinar, the feedback form will automatically show up, and we just appreciate your feedback so we can continue to provide you with quality webinars and content.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.